Some families built their fortunes through oil. Others controlled entire banking systems. And a few became so wealthy that kings and governments depended on them. But one family in history may have accumulated over $1 trillion in wealth. So the question is simple. Who was the richest family in history? To answer that, we need to travel across centuries of history from Renaissance Italy to the oil fields of the Middle East and compare the fortunes of the most powerful dynasties ever. Because measuring wealth across history isn't easy. Money in the 1500s was worth far more than money today. Some fortunes came from private businesses. Others came from ruling entire nations. But by adjusting these fortunes into modern economic terms, we can finally compare them and discover which family truly stands above the rest. The Medici Empire. On September 7th, 1434, a quiet procession entered the city of Florence. At its center was a man recently returned from exile. His name was Cosimo de' Medici. To the public, Cosimo was simply a wealthy banker. But in reality, he was about to become the most powerful man in Florence. Not through armies, not through crowns, but through money. Behind Cosimo stood the financial machine known as the Medici Bank. At the time, banking in Europe was extremely dangerous. Kings defaulted on loans. Trade routes collapsed overnight. And transporting gold across borders invited robbery. But the Medici solved this problem with a revolutionary system. Instead of moving physical money, they moved information. They created one of the first international banking networks in history. Branches opened in Rome, Venice, Geneva, Bruges, and even London. Merchants could deposit money in one city and withdraw it in another. For the first time, wealth could move across Europe safely. Soon, the most powerful institutions in Europe became their clients. Popes, kings, and entire governments. In fact, the Vatican itself relied heavily on the Medici Bank to manage church finances. But financial power rarely stays separate from politics. By the mid-1400s, the Medici family effectively controlled Florence. Officially, the city remained a republic. Unofficially, the Medici decided who held power. Their influence grew even further when members of the family rose to the highest position in the Catholic Church. Over time, the Medici dynasty produced 4 popes, giving them influence over both politics and religion. But their legacy wasn't only about money and power. It was also about culture. The Medici family became the greatest patrons of the Renaissance. They funded artists, architects, and scientists who would shape Western civilization. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo received support from Medici patrons. Their palaces became meeting places for philosophers and artists. And Florence transformed into the cultural capital of Europe. Historians estimate that at its peak, the Medici fortune would equal roughly $130 billion in today's money. An extraordinary amount for a banking dynasty that began with a modest business in Florence. But the Medici proved something powerful. In the Renaissance world, control of money could shape politics, religion, and culture at the same time. Yet even their immense wealth would eventually be surpassed. Because the next dynasty would build an empire not through banking, but by dominating the most valuable resource of the industrial age: oil. The Rockefeller Family. On January 10, 1870, a quiet businessman in Cleveland, Ohio, created a company that would change the global economy. His name was John D. Rockefeller. The company was called Standard Oil. At the time, the American oil industry was chaotic. Hundreds of small refineries competed for survival. Prices constantly crashed. Profits were unpredictable. Many entrepreneurs entered the business hoping to strike it rich. Most went bankrupt. Rockefeller saw something others didn't. He realized the real money wasn't in drilling oil. It was in controlling the refining and distribution. So he began building an empire. Rockefeller approached competitors with a simple offer: sell your company to Standard Oil, or compete with it. Those who refused quickly learned the consequences. Standard Oil would slash prices in their region until smaller companies collapsed. Then Rockefeller would buy their assets for a fraction of their value. At the same time, he negotiated secret transportation deals with railroads. While competitors paid full shipping costs, Standard Oil paid far less. This gave Rockefeller an enormous advantage. Within just a few decades, the results were astonishing. By the 1880s, Standard Oil controlled nearly 90% of America's oil refining capacity. No company in modern history had dominated an industry so completely. The profits were staggering. By 1913, Rockefeller's personal fortune was estimated at about 2% of the entire U.S. economy. To understand the scale of that wealth, imagine a single person today controlling 2% of the American economy. That would equal over $400 billion, making Rockefeller possibly the richest American who ever lived. But such power attracted enormous public anger. Critics accused Standard Oil of crushing competition and manipulating markets. Investigative journalist Ida Tarbell published a famous exposé revealing the company's aggressive tactics. Public pressure grew rapidly. Finally, in 1911, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that Standard Oil was an illegal monopoly. The company was broken into 34 separate corporations. Many believed this decision would destroy Rockefeller's empire. Instead, the opposite happened, because Rockefeller owned shares in all of the new companies, and as those companies grew independently, his fortune grew even larger. Yet later in life, something unexpected happened. Rockefeller began giving much of his wealth away. He funded universities, medical research, and public health programs. Institutions like the University of Chicago and the Rockefeller Foundation were created through his fortune. By the time he died in 1937, Rockefeller had donated more than half of his wealth, transforming his legacy from ruthless industrialist into one of history's most influential philanthropists. Today, historians estimate the Rockefeller dynasty's wealth at its peak would equal roughly $340 billion in modern terms. But while Rockefeller dominated a single industry, the next dynasty would control something even more powerful. Not oil, not railroads, but the flow of global finance itself. The Rothschild Family. On September 19th, 1815, panic swept through the London Stock Exchange. Rumors were spreading across the trading floor. Some believed Napoleon Bonaparte had defeated Britain's forces at the Battle of Waterloo. If the rumors were true, Britain's financial system could collapse. Traders rushed to sell government bonds. Prices began to crash. But one man on the trading floor remained calm. His name was Nathan Mayer Rothschild. While everyone else was selling, he was buying. Nathan had information that no one else in London possessed. A private courier network had already delivered the truth. Napoleon had been defeated. When official confirmation reached London the next day, British bonds surged. Nathan's gamble made an enormous profit. But that moment was only a small part of a much larger story, because the Rothschild family had been building their financial empire for decades. Their rise began with Mayer Amschel Rothschild in Frankfurt during the late 1700s. At the time, Mayer operated a modest business dealing in coins and rare collectibles. But he had a strategy no banker had attempted before. Instead of building one powerful bank, he created 5. Mayer sent each of his 5 sons to a different financial capital in Europe. One son established a bank in London. Another went to Paris. Others expanded into Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt. This created one of the first truly international banking networks in history. Information and money could move across Europe faster than governments could react. During the Napoleonic Wars, many nations faced enormous financial pressure. Armies needed weapons, governments needed loans, and the Rothschild family became the bankers of Europe. They financed wars. They funded infrastructure projects. They supported the construction of railways that connected entire countries. By the mid-1800s, the Rothschild network had influence across most of Europe's financial system. Few banking families had ever accumulated such power. Historians estimate that at their peak, the Rothschild fortune could equal roughly $400 billion in today's money, possibly making them one of the richest families in recorded history. Yet even this extraordinary financial empire may not hold the ultimate record, because the next dynasty built its wealth not through banking, but through control of a nation's most valuable resource. The House of Saud. On January 15, 1902, a small group of warriors approached a fortress in the desert city of Riyadh. At their head was a young leader determined to reclaim his family's lost kingdom. His name was Abdulaziz ibn Saud. With fewer than 50 men, he launched a daring attack on the Mazmak fortress. By sunrise, the fortress had fallen. That victory marked the beginning of a campaign that would reshape the Arabian Peninsula. Over the next 3 decades, Ibn Saud fought dozens of battles, forming alliances with tribal leaders and expanding his territory across the desert. Finally, in 1932, he officially established a new nation. It was called Saudi Arabia. But the event that transformed the kingdom into a global power happened just a few years later. On March 3, 1938, American geologists drilling near Dhahran discovered enormous oil reserves beneath the Saudi desert. The discovery would change the global energy market forever. Over time, these resources led to the creation of Saudi Aramco. The company would eventually become the most profitable oil producer in the world. In recent years, Saudi Aramco has been valued at over $2 trillion, making it one of the most valuable companies in history. Because the House of Saud controls the government of Saudi Arabia, their wealth extends far beyond corporate profits. Their financial power comes from multiple sources: oil revenues flowing from one of the world's largest petroleum reserves, massive sovereign wealth funds investing across global markets, and luxury real estate and assets spread across Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. The royal family itself is enormous. Today, the House of Saud includes thousands of princes and extended relatives, but the most powerful members control vast fortunes. Analysts estimate the combined wealth of the royal dynasty could exceed $1 trillion, making them likely the richest ruling family in modern history. Yet their power demonstrates something unique about wealth in the modern world. Unlike banking dynasties or industrial empires, their fortune is tied directly to control of natural resources and political power. But the next dynasty built its fortune in a very different way. Not through oil, not through government power, but through a business strategy that transformed global retail forever. So let's compare these fortunes in modern terms. Approximate peak wealth. Medici Family, about $130 billion. Rockefeller Family, about $340 billion. Rothschild Family, about $400 billion. House of Saud, potentially over $1 trillion. Of course, measuring wealth across centuries is complicated. Some fortunes came from private businesses. Others came from ruling entire nations. But if we compare their economic influence and modern value estimates, one dynasty appears to stand above the rest. The House of Saud. Their control of massive oil reserves and national assets may make them the richest family in human history. From Renaissance bankers to industrial oil tycoons to royal families controlling trillion-dollar resources. History shows that the greatest fortunes weren't just about money. They were about power, influence, and control over the world's most valuable resources. And the families who held that power didn't just become wealthy. They helped shape the course of human history.